Hey everybody, how are you? Excuse me. I'm glad you're here. We've got a great program that I've designed for you today. It is talking about, metabolic syndrome, but it's talking about a lot about cholesterol and high blood pressure. It's talking about the cause of those things. I've got some great studies for you, and I'm going to go over all of it. While I'm just getting our redundant recording system put into place, I am doing some multitasking. I read that multitasking is not as efficient for men as it is for women. Women, they do a better job at it. I mean, we got to be honest. So hopefully I've got everything loaded up. If you can, just hop over and send me a text on the right side of the screen. Let me know that you're there. Let me know that you can hear me. And that will really help me out. Let me just type this. Let me know if you can hear me, see me. And then we'll be all ready to go. So you should be able to hear me. The microphone is on. The camera is on. I am live. And hopefully your holiday season is going great. That's the plan, right? So today we're going to talk about, let me just get things going here. We're going to move away from me and go right to the slide presentation. We're going to talk about some of the implications of the sorry, I'm trying to get rid of this screen, of insulin and the effects that it has on our body, but also the other effects that it has. Now, this is a scan. I'll talk about it a little bit more. This is a DEXA. This is kind of like an MRI of your body. You can see your skeletal bones there. You can see the red on the outside of the human figure. That's the excess fat. The blue is the muscle density. And so the red is the areas that we want to get rid of, right? And here's just a chart showing your fasting insulin levels are high when you gain more weight. The heavier you are, the higher your insulin levels. And we're going to go through this. Those of you that this is the first time that you're here, I'm a food scientist that specializes in the treatment of metabolic syndrome and chronic disease, things like high blood pressure and high cholesterol and obesity, digestive disorders, type 2 diabetes. These are the things that are plaguing most of us. In fact, 80% of Americans have at least one of the symptoms of metabolic syndrome, one chronic disease. And we talk about how to overcome it by using food, functional foods, powerful foods, not about special ingredients from the rainforest that you've never heard of before, just regular, normal foods. And so we're going to go into our presentation talking about how they can help. Now, how many of you have received a blood test? You go to your doctor, you get your blood drawn, then you go back to have the doctor explain to you what your blood test is, and the doctor pulls out your blood results and tells you, I have to keep you on your medication, or I have to increase the dose, or maybe even add another dose because your cholesterol is too high, right? And I like this little the cartoon because it definitely illustrates the confusion that we can have. The doctor says your cholesterol is bad, your good cholesterol is bad, your bad cholesterol is good, and your socks don't match. So you walk out of the office going, I don't know. I guess I got to take these pills, right? And that's the wrong message. That's the thing that we don't just want to believe. It's not that doctors are trying to do something harmful to us. It's just that honestly, most doctors, a very small percentage of doctors, are not research scientists. They're not research physicians. They are practicing physicians. They don't have time to do research. They barely have time to see their patients and write you a prescription. Some of them are surgeons. They don't have time to delve into all the research. So there's groups of doctors that are research scientists, and then there's groups of doctors that perform procedures and practice medicine. And so this chart here, we're told that our total cholesterol, you can see here, our total cholesterol should never be above 200, right? And what if I told you that your total cholesterol level, it doesn't matter 2 whips to your health? And I'm going to show studies that prove it. Now, we're told that our LDL, now this graphic here, I kind of messed up when I uploaded my PowerPoint, and I uploaded the wrong one. Whoops. Thought I was doing the right one, uploaded the wrong one. So I'll have to describe. This is just a simple image that tells us that our LDL levels shouldn't be higher than 130. Would you be interested to know that the studies show that higher LDL levels don't negatively affect your health at all? However, damaged or oxidized LDL levels are the ones that are the cholesterols that can cause problems. So damaged LDL is bad. Regular, undamaged, unoxidized LDLs are fine. They're good. Actually, they're good for us. But the test that your doctor is running isn't detecting the damaged LDLs. They're just looking for all LDLs. There's some pretty convincing breadcrumbs that paint a picture that pharmaceutical companies that make the drugs that millions of people take every single day are behind the medical justification that these drugs do any good for us at all. Believe it or not, there has been suggestions that we should be putting, there was a group of doctors, not research scientists, just doctors, that suggested that in some countries, even in the United States, we should be putting statins, which are a drug that controls cholesterol levels, in our water supply, so that you don't have to prescribe medication and then hope that the people are taking the medications. You know, you got to keep that cholesterol down. We'll just put it in your water. So everybody gets it. Children get it. Healthy people get it. People that don't have high cholesterol get it. You give it to your, how do you water your dog and your parakeet? We're going to feed them statins as well, because that's just a good idea. Luckily, that hasn't happened. Let's really make some major noise if that does start to happen, right? So let me go through some solid science of labs that have no ties, no financial incentive to make cholesterol medication appear to be the perfect solution, right? There are 7 basic forms of cholesterol. There's the ones you hear about is total cholesterol, HDL, LDL. Sometimes you'll hear about VLDL and ILDL, but commonly HDL is recognized as the healthy version, and you should get that as high as you can, but you should keep your LDL low. So, what if I told you that having good, undamaged LDL levels should be high as well? And you just can't have, and how you get is a little bit of a hint, how you get some of the damaged good LDLs is by having elevated LDLs and elevated glucose levels and insulin levels at the same time. That's where your LDLs will be damaged. It's the sugar, it's the glucose and the insulin that attack the good healthy LDL, that turn it bad, convince it, turn it over to the dark side of the force, and makes it bad for us. All right. Now, you've heard me say that that good health is the absence of what we call metabolic syndrome. Okay, and metabolic syndrome to a doctor has 5 measurements, 5 things. If you have 3 of those 5, you'll be diagnosed with metabolic syndrome. That includes if you have added weight around your abdomen, if your fasting glucose is over 120, if your blood pressure is over 135 over 85, if your triglycerides are over 140, and if your HDL is below 40, that's the good one. If you have just 3 of those, then your doctor's going to write you off and say, yep, you got metabolic syndrome. And it's only going to get worse unless you change the thing that made those symptoms occur. Unless you back that out and reverse it, it's only going to get worse. More things are going to happen, right? So if the interesting thing is that each one of those problems is caused directly, literally, by over secretion of insulin and insulin resistant. Your cells being resistant to insulin, right? And if you get insulin, let me explain that slide a little bit first. This is just the process of your triglycerides being converted and transported inside a fat cell. So that big round thing there is a fat cell, and how it happens, how glucose is sucked into it, how insulin is the one that pushes that glucose inside the cell. So you've got triglycerides outside the cell, and once it gets inside, the triglycerides are inside the cell, and then you got fatty acids, and it just keeps on getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? That's how we get bigger as we gain fat. It's the cell itself that blows up like an air balloon, right? So here is an example of high blood pressure and the impact of that high blood pressure and insulin. So here you have the controlled group at the back line down below, and this shows that over 28 days period of time, they start increasing insulin and its effect on blood pressure. Nothing else has changed. All it's changing is the amounts of insulin. And you can see right out of the gate, the very first day that the insulin is causing the blood pressure to rise. It goes from about 97, it bumps up to 103, it goes from 103 to 104, 105, it goes up above 105, it goes down a little bit, but it still is measurably higher simply because of the presence of insulin, right? Now, I'm gonna talk about this process of how we gain, how insulin is a key factor to causing our blood pressure to go up, among some other things. Okay, and what that means is that here in this diagram, this is an illustration of our kidney, and it'll pull in, it'll take sodium out of our bloodstream. It pulls it into the kidneys. The kidneys, in where I have the arrow, is the tube that flows down and exits our body. So there's the import of our kidneys, and down here is where it secretes out, and that's our urine that we get rid of. Okay, this illustration here is the filtering process that we know that we hear what kidneys do. So it's filtering out all the things we don't want to have go back into our bloodstream, right? And this is just the tube process of the urine or the blood being turned into urine. So here, what you have, these 4 points here, are actually points in your body that insulin influences, and insulin tells these receptors to pull the sodium as it's going through this process of eliminating urine. It pulls the sodium out of your urine. So your body is set, your kidneys are set to say, okay, I got enough sodium, I don't need any more, I'm going to dump it, I'm going to get rid of the excess. But because of the influence of insulin, it will use these 4 separate receptors to pull the sodium back out of the urine and says, no, I'm not getting rid of it. I'm going to hold on to it. Well, we all know that sodium is a chemical process. We learned this in high school, for heaven's sakes, that it is the process whereby we, wherever sodium goes, or should I say, where water is, sodium is, if excess sodium is there, water is just going to be attracted to it. It's going to happen whether we want it or not, right? And so this is the process, the chemical relationship that insulin has to sodium. Now, what is the process? How do we get too much sodium going on to do this disconnect? It's because another function of insulin is that when you and I eat carbohydrates, when it's going to be converted and processed into glucose. Well, that glucose, as soon as it hits the bloodstream, your body knows I got to take that glucose out of the bloodstream. I got to get it out of there, and I got to dump it into the cells so that the cells can use it as energy. I can't have the bloodstream just have elevated glucose levels going higher and higher. I got to do my job and convert it back into, or rather give it to the cells so that the cells can convert it to energy. Well, as your body continues to be in a high glucose state, it's going to never let go of the sodium, because that's the other feature that insulin does. It holds on to the sodium. And glucagon, which is the opposite of insulin, when you are on a low carb diet, insulin is very low, and your glucagon tells these 4 receptors to the kidney saying, you know what, I've got enough sodium, dump it out. Every time you urinate, you're going to dump that excess amount of sodium. That is why you've heard me say you absolutely have to be on a higher sodium consumption in order to be healthy, and even to avoid early mortality. If you have too little salt, you can die. All right. So this is an important illustration that you need to really understand. Right. So I'm going to talk about how it relates to other things like blood pressure. But here on this chart, it was a great study, large study, over 100,000 people in 17 different countries. So we wanted to get a broad, different database. And it showed a 24-hour sodium excretion, the sodium that was leaving the body. And they did it for three and a half, almost 4 years. And it showed the effects on mortality, death, for those people that have low sodium and high sodium, right? So this is important, because you hear so much of that sodium is bad for us. Sodium causes high blood pressure. It doesn't. And here's a study that actually shows it, okay? So on this chart, you'll look down at the bottom. You can't see the graph very well, but down at the very bottom where it says 0 and then 2.0, all right, that is the amount of sodium in grams that's leaving the body. So we automatically know that if I know that I see 2 grams leaving the body in a day, I know that the body, that person is at least getting 2 grams in, because the body can't create sodium out of thin air. Just doesn't have that ability. So you'll see here that the ratio on the far right is the increase of death, right? So let's start with just over there, the graph as it loops down. You'll see that those that have lower, 2 grams of sodium a day have almost a 2.5 time increase of mortality. Let's put that in another way. If you're only peeing out 2 grams of sodium a day, your chances of dying early is 2.5 times greater. Haven't heard that, have you? Your doctor didn't tell you that. Well, it's not your doctor's fault, because the pharmaceutical company didn't tell the doctor, and the doctor didn't learn that in medical school, right? So if you go further down, let's look down at 4 grams, 4.5 grams, 6 grams, right? Right in that range, right where that loop of the graph is going down at its lowest point. Look at the mortality rate. It's at 1. That means it's equal. It's not an increase of mortality. So what it's showing here is that the sweet spot of how many grams of sodium that we should be at least getting into our diet is right around 5 to 6 grams a day. Now it does start going up a little bit, but where you can see clear over on the far right is the amount of 11 grams of sodium. It does start to tick up a little bit at one, so you have about a 20% increase of mortality if you're secreting or bringing in about 11, 12 grams of sodium a day. So you can get too much, right? But that's only in the case if you have a also higher carbohydrate diet, because you don't have to worry about getting too much sodium in a low carb diet, because your body automatically dumps out the excess. That's the safety mechanism for you. So this is a great study that shows that the sweet spot of sodium is much higher than what we're told, right? There's a little bit zoomed in version of what I just told you. So here's another illustration that shows the effects of triglycerides and blood glucose. So you have type 2 diabetics in this example, which is the black line is the below line. That's the healthy subjects. Those that are above it have elevated levels of triglycerides because their levels of insulin is considerably higher. Okay. This diagram, I wanted to show a process. So when you hear about de novo lipogenesis, what that means is that just simply means that's the process of your body making fat that is going to be stored in your body. So even if you're consuming fat, it still has to be converted so that it can be stored, right, as fat. Now that doesn't happen like you think it is. We don't get fat because we're eating fat. But that it still has to be converted by this process. Carbohydrates have to go through this process to be stored as fat. If you're getting an excess amount of proteins, this is still the process. The de novo lipogenesis is the process. So I wanted to show this study. They wanted to see a good large group of people over the course of just in this study, it was only 8 days, okay, showing how fat is created. So the very bottom graph is 1 day to 8 days. Over on the far left, you'll see in grams the measurement of how much it is. So let me explain with these arrows. You'll see on the far left, I have energy from carbs with an arrow pointing to glycogen storage. All glycogen storage is glucose that has been stored as your emergency supply in your liver and in your muscles. Most of it's in your muscles, about 90% of the amount that you have. And your body can only store about 100 grams, okay? The more muscle you have, the more capacity of glycogen storage you can possess. So your glycogen storage tanks, your gas tanks, can be bigger based on the amount of muscle you have, okay? So I want you to kind of pay attention to how big it is and how small it goes. I'll explain more about that later. Then flip over to the top right. When you see lipogenesis, what that means is that's the process or the amount of fat that was created, okay? And then down below that where it says carbs turned into energy, that is identified in the scientific terms, CHO oxidation. So oxidizing this energy is being burned. The amount of, in this case, the amount of carbohydrates that are eaten, that's also being burned as fuel. Okay. So what they did is they took these people, they gave them more carbohydrates than they actually needed, right? More than the body's ability to burn. And you can see that in the first day. Oh, by the way, from day 1 to day 8, it was the same amount of carbohydrates. They didn't increase it as time went on. It's just the same amount. So they identified, all right, we're going to give them this ultra high amount of carbohydrates that's more than we know this body needs, or should I say, energy, glucose, that this body needs to have to go about its day and doing the activities that it needs. Okay. So on first day, you'll see that the level of oxidation is lower. It's being burned. However, look at how much fat is stored in lipogenesis or being created. None. Look at the glycogen storage. How much is of the excess amount of glucose that I just made from the carbohydrates? How much of that was stored in my glucose storage tanks? None. Right. So what that means is you can eat a lot of carbs in a day and not gain any fat. Don't worry. Right. However, let's look what happened to day 2. Now you'll see that the levels of the CHO oxidation, the amount of those carbs being burned for energy, increases substantially. It goes from about 150 up to 400 grams a day. The body says, wow, I got energy, I'm going to burn it off. That's good. You want that. Your body regulates saying, I got more, I'm going to burn more. But and the levels of glycogen storage then shoots up. I'm gonna fill my tanks, fill them to the top as high as I can go, so that if the tiger's chasing me and I need more energy, I can tap into my emergency reserves. All right, we're taking care of it. Then let's go to day 3. You'll see that the body says again, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why they're eating more carbs than they need, but I'll burn off more. I'll burn off as much as I can. These people were doing the same activity level. It didn't change. This is part of the magic of your body. The body's saying, look, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why they're eating so much, but I'll try to give them a break and I'll burn off excess. This is one example right here in this great study that shows that calories in does not equal calories out. That math doesn't work. And here's absolute proof that that process is not recognized by your body. Your body doesn't know how to count calories. So you'll see now that we're in our 3rd day. Your body's burning more of the carbs that we're eating, same amount of carbs that we started out with. You go into the 4th day. Oh, I should add, let's stay on the 3rd day. Look now what happens with the lipogenesis. You'll see that the body starts saying, okay, look, I've given them a couple of days of eating this extra amount, but I've got to start creating some storage of fat. It's going beyond my means of burning just to burn. I can't just keep ramping up my metabolism. I gotta store some of it. So you start storing. And it looks here by in this chart, I'm storing about 100 grams worth. Okay, so I'm storing about 100 grams of that fat, or as fat. Then you go into the 4th day. Your body's trying to keep up. The oxidation, the CHO oxidation, the burning capacity even goes higher. I says, I'm trying to burn off. I don't want you to gain fat, but I'm doing what I can. Your levels of glycogen storage goes down. You're starting to reach the maximum capacity of how much could be stored for that emergency. But look what happens to your lipogenesis. That graph just got bigger. It increased by 50%. You're storing more fat. Going to the 5th day. Now the body starts saying, I just can't continue to burn this off. Your oxygenation levels go down. Your fat substantially increases. The amount of storage glycogen goes down. Then look what happens in day 6, day 7, day 8. And what happens is you're storing more and more fat as time goes on. So this is a great example of how fat is created inside your cells, and how your body can give you a bit of relief. Okay, so let's go into what's happening in the liver. Now, I know that this is kind of complex. Don't worry about every one of those graphs there, but just this is an image of a liver, right? The outside image. But if you look inside, those are actually what liver cells look like if you put it under a microscope. Okay, and so I thought this would be kind of cool illustration so you know what your liver looks like. Well, in the center, you see this little image of triglycerides. What happens also is the triglycerides are pulled from free fatty acids. They're pulled from the process that we just talked about, the de novo lipogenesis, and simultaneously to you storing fat. So if we zoomed in on fat and said, what's in this fat? It's a very complex mechanism or a molecule. The process is not just fat. It's not that yellow stuff. It has a lot of stuff going on, and one of them is triglycerides. Well, the triglycerides then will convert over to what we call VHDL, and you'll see that up in the top right-hand corner. So when your doctor's looking for in your blood, when he does a blood test, and he says, look at those blue boxes, you'll see AST, ALT, GGT. If they give you that kind of terminology, what they're looking for is in the blood test, they'll see these forms spilling into your bloodstream. Your liver's spilling out extra amount because it can't process it. And that's how we know that you have some level of a fatty liver. That's how we know that it's not good things aren't happening. You're creating too many triglycerides because of what insulin's influence is doing. This is how we pick it up. Now, there's other mechanisms there that you'll see in the blue box, but now you're seeing in your bloodstream these extra amounts of triglycerides floating around, okay? This is not a good thing. This is what we're trying to avoid. We got to have some triglycerides, but we don't want too many. And so what I want to point out is the fact that in this graph, this is an example. I'm just gonna, it's a little small, so let me kind of explain it. If you look at the images, you'll see the very bottom on the far right. That's your levels of insulin. So it's measuring how many. This is over years, by the way, right? Over years of a patient database. They start out the insulin level. If you see that dotted line, you'll see that it started out low. And as over time, the amount of insulin that your pancreas was putting out just continued to increase and increase and increase. All right, where it starts getting into that blue, that darker shaded area, where you start to see the insulin curving back down and dropping drastically. It's actually dropping lower than where it started 30 years previous, right? Okay, let me tell you what that means. That is absolute proof, in case you don't know how to read dots, the dot language. So what that chart is showing is your pancreas is getting wore out. It has hyperinsulinemia, it has too much fat, it's getting used too often, it's getting called on too often. Simultaneously, your cells are saying, I don't know what the crap insulin is doing, but it's always telling me to absorb glucose, so I'm going to stop listening to it. So you start getting insulin resistance. When you have insulin resistance, you have the pancreas doing its only trick up its sleeve, which is increase the amount of insulin, because I got to get the glucose out of the bloodstream. If there's too much in the bloodstream, I know the brain can shut down, and then that person's dead. Got to have the brain to be alive. So this is years and years of eating a high carbohydrate diet. We can see that by this dotted line of your cells starting to be insulin resistant more and more and more and more and more. And it doesn't actually have to take 30 years. It doesn't have to take 15, 20 years. Now, because of the amount of carbs that the average person's eating, that time frame from 30 years is cut down to much less. Studies have shown that you can become insulin resistant, or at least some of your cells can become insulin resistant overnight. And you've heard my program talk about that. Not all your cells, just some selected cells. So that's how fast it can happen. It's happening faster than this study is illustrating. So let's go into the long dash. So you had the dots, that's the insulin. The dash, you'll see there that says FPG, that's fasting plasma glucose. Fancy talk for how much blood sugar is in my bloodstream. Well, simultaneously, you see that that's going up too. So as the pancreas is secreting more insulin and the cells are saying, I don't want you around, I'm not listening to you anymore. When the cells aren't listening to insulin, that means that it's not pulling the glucose out of the bloodstream and using it as energy. And if it's not pulling it out of the bloodstream, that's why the glucose levels are rising. That's why they're getting so darn high. All right. And so this is not good. This is not good information for us. And so we don't want this to happen in our lifestyle. This is what we're trying to avoid, but this is why it happens. Now, this graph or this chart was to taking what we're called or recognized as, well, some say the oldest, I guess, form of humanity, of humans that we have, which is the Australian Aborigines. The living ones, a race or a group of people that haven't died off. They've stayed alive through the millennia that the humans have been alive. And so they took these Aborigines that were in the city, started eating normal westernized food, and they wanted to take them back into what was a traditional Aboriginal food diet, right? And so what you'll see here is before they did the study, you'll see the levels of triglycerides, fasting blood glucose levels, and their BMI, how much weight they had. And you'll see here that just after 7 weeks, it wasn't very long. 7 weeks is not much, but their triglycerides dropped from 4.02 to 1.5, less than half. The triglycerides just dropped. That's the liver saying, thank you for the vacation you gave me. I don't have to spill so many triglycerides back into your blood because you gave me too much to process, right? Then it also showed that their BMI dropped from 27.2 to 24.5. They lost stored body fat. That process of deoneolipogenesis reversed, right? And then the fasting blood glucose was cut in half from 11.6 down to 6.5. This is only 7 weeks. They didn't exercise. They just simply changed their diet. So I wanted to dive into and actually looking into what was the big change. What was it that was inside the diet? What kind of diet? This is a magic diet. And what happened is the food that they ate was primarily high fat. A very common delicacy in the Aborigine, not just Aborigines, but other cultures, would eat this, what is called a witchetty grub. This grub has 67% fat. Okay, look at the size of this thing. Here's a picture. It's as long as your hand, all right? And what do these grubs eat, by the way? They are not buying hamburgers and pizza. They're not eating fat. Fat's not available to them. They're eating a carbohydrate diet, a vegetarian diet. That's how they got so fat. And so this is a great example that they found they ate more than the grubs, of course, right? But they found that their diets were very, very high. Very similar to the amount of fat that I recommend that you eat, which is 65-70% of your calories should be coming from quality fats. Now, I apologize, this one's a little small, but this is a meta study taking hundreds of other studies and looking at their end result. And what this is showing is it's showing the difference between people that are following a westernized diet. This one is correlating the Australian equivalent to our national health recommend or council, and paralleling the two. The people that are following what is recommended by dietitians, and those that are eating a lower carbohydrate, low insulin producing diet. And the list of, in this meta-analysis, which you can't ignore because it's hundreds of studies, it's not one study, it's the results of hundreds of studies, and some of those studies have 10, 20, 30, and some of them have hundreds of people inside their study. So it's a very large group, tens of thousands of people. And it just simply shows very clearly that that the net result is that a high carbohydrate diet will negatively impact our body because of its chemical makeup. It will get fatter. We will create insulin resistance and will be hyperinsulinic, and then we start having high blood pressure. We start having increased glucose levels. We create type 2 diabetes by our food diet. We create heart disease by our diet. We create and damage the good cholesterols. Our diet has cholesterol in it, which is just fine. There's no problem with it. It is a net result of the sugars and damaging the good quality cholesterols. Here's another example of a liver function. The column on the left is a traditional Americanized diet. The column on the left is a low carbohydrate diet. I told you you can see here the levels of triglycerides that are in the blood are lower in every case. The levels of both the forms AST and the LT that I told you were basically examples of a fatty liver are lower in every example. Look at the one at the very bottom, the ALT. That's a form of saying, hey, I got a fatty liver. It was 52. It dropped down to 19, significantly lower. And this was just a 7-week study. So you'll see that our glucose tolerance will change depending on how long we're having high insulin levels. And it can change as soon as a matter of days. If we continue to do it, it will change over the course of months into our tissue. It'll change from just our blood pressure going up and our cholesterol levels go up into having tissue problems like organs starting to diminish in their quality. These are just glucose loads showing as soon as 2 hours how it can change and its impact on us drop or increasing. This is an example of increasing the amount. Here's the person, they had their glucose levels that would peak at 15.4 after 1 hour. They start taking high carbohydrate diet and it peaks now at 47.8, much more than double the level. But look how much longer. It lasts longer at high. So it's 120. Now some advocates of a high carb diet, like take, for example, for years, the recipe for a long distance runner, a marathon runner, was to pre-carb load before the race so that I have energy that will burn during my race. And they use this kind of data to say, look, my glucose levels are higher than they were if I eat a low carb diet, and they're higher for a longer period of time. And that's true. However, what they don't consider is the tremendous crash that comes after, and the fact that more glucose is required in order to get the old level that they had a month ago. Your body starts resisting all of that insulin which then in turn lowers the amount of glucose it has the ability to pull out for that race run. And you'd have to keep on doing it and doing it and doing it higher and higher every single time. And then you saw in the earlier graph that your pancreas says, I can't keep up with you anymore. And it starts to shut down. And that, don't be confused by saying, well, great, I have more energy for a longer period of time. There's a negative price to pay. But you can have that high energy without the damaging effects of high insulin and high glucose. And what's the solution to that? It's fat. Healthy fat will do that with no negative side effects on the organs or on your tissue. There's no such thing as a fat resistance at your cellular level, all right? That's just another illustration of the same graph, just zoomed in a little bit more. Same example here. I'm going to do this in two different charts. You'll show here that the same example, but now measuring the amounts of insulin, all right, in its relationship. These are showing dropping from or increasing from 4 insulin levels, which is a normal health, and bumping up to 10 after a short duration of overconsumption of carbohydrates. These are not healthy levels. Simultaneously, what happens is your blood glucose is shooting up there. You can see there in the blue, and your insulin levels try to keep up. That's why it kind of humps up and then it starts dropping off, because your body starts getting insulin resistant. That's what this chart is telling us. Your body can't respond. It can't continue on this trajectory of higher glucose levels. Insulin tries to keep up. It tries to stay on course, but it doesn't. Eventually, you got to pay the piper. And it's kind of like that cartoon of joking of why they play so hard, living in the fast lane, right? Little bit of sleep, wild, crazy living, drinking, smoking, partying, right? And they want to, when they turn this body back in to their maker, they want it to wore out, right? They want to get their money's worth, so to speak. The challenge is that that's going to happen. It's going to be wore out, but it's going to get wore out faster than you plan on using it. And our bodies are designed to live longer and healthier than what currently we're seeing. You're seeing people that are 50, 60, 70 years old, and they are in horrible health. I'm seeing people from my high school years. I'm 56 years old, that are dying from heart attacks and dying from these chronic issues that are plaguing us. I'm not the only one. You see it too. You have your friends and family and coworkers that are suffering from strokes and heart attacks, and it's not every once in a while. It's happening prolifically. So hopefully you got a little bit of better explanation on the fact that don't be afraid of high cholesterol levels unless you decide to stay in a high insulin producing diet. If you're in a high insulin levels, then you got to get that, then be concerned about elevated glucose levels. Glucose is not bad. Cholesterol is not bad unless it's been damaged. And what is it that damages it? Sugars and insulin. So if you keep your sugars low, your insulin low, it won't damage the cholesterol. And you can have, who cares about the levels of your cholesterol? Doesn't matter. You do want to have your HDLs as high as physically possible, and that will take care of all the other triglycerides, for example, that get damaged and we get too much of them. So don't worry about sugar or sodium causing high blood pressure. It doesn't. I showed in the chart that if you eat too little salt, you will have increased mortality. If you have symptoms of the keto flu, you start in a keto diet and you start feeling like you're dizzy when you stand up, or your blood pressure drops down and you don't feel so well. It's not because the diet is bad. It's not because it increases your mortality. It's because it's doing its job and it's using the sodium that's in your bloodstream, doesn't pee it out, and you need to take more, and those problems will go away almost immediately. I mean, you'll start to feel the difference in 30 minutes. It's that fast. And that's why we have our hydrate pills. Basically, it's an electrolyte that helps keep those sodiums in your bloodstream. I take on average of about 4 to 6 grams of sodium every day. And my blood pressure is 117 over 72. I'm fine. I don't have any plaque buildup or high blood pressure. And I'm having 4 times more than what, 3 to 4 times more than what they recommend in sodium. I'm not unique. I'm not a Superman. It's simply because of the diet that we recommend that you follow that proves to be life-saving. So hopefully that was some good information. Sorry about uploading the wrong slides. I'll shoot this again and you can have the right slides, but be careful with your diet. Be careful with your food, and follow some of these examples that science has gratefully provided to us. And I promise you, you'll feel better. You'll be better, and you'll be around a little bit longer. I want to see you next week and the week after. So happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Enjoy the holidays, and we'll see you next week.